We're not out there fighting anything other than crime.
We see stuff that nobody should have to
Put
see.
your hands back! Hands it back! Hands it back! Go!
Get out of it, Mel. Get out of it! Get out of it!
Don't move! Don't move!
George 31, erect out.
Don't go!
Put it in paper. You're going to jail. Where else do you think you're going?
You're listening to The Beat, profiles of police nationwide. It's a Friday night on The Beat, and it's the second of the Beat shows that we've had this week. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Mike the New Haven podcast. It's episode 305, and though that's the Miami area code, tonight's guest patrolled the streets of L.A. for multiple decades, as we'll discuss with him. If you haven't checked out the previous episode, and that was 304, like I said, volume 9 of The Beat, first time with an ATF agent speaking with him, and that was Corey Hill. Corey started in the New York field office from 2000 until 2008, worked down in D.C. for a few years, and was in El Paso, Texas for the final 10, and had the two shootings, both in Odessa and the Walmart shooting, both in 2019, to handle as a resident special agent in charge. So we got the investigative perspective on that. So if you haven't checked that one out, of course, go back and do so. We are live tonight, as always, on YouTube and LinkedIn, so welcome to everybody tuning in via those means. Appreciate you being here as always. And of course, tonight's guest, it's really going to be a great show. He has a lot of different stories. And as I mentioned in the promo, even though he worked in Hollywood, these aren't Hollywood tall tales like you see in the movies. These are the real thing. Hello to John Costello, Bob Geis, and Joe Maliga in the chat, and everybody else tuning in. As always, a couple of sponsors. It's usually Billy Ryan, some shows, but of course tonight there's another great sponsor that we have. We'll get to him momentarily, but that will be right after this ad for MC Media Editing Services. Need advice on how to start your podcast? Frustrated with the editing process? Can't find a voiceover guy? Hi, I'm Mike Colón, and I'm here to help. I'm the owner and founder of MC Media Editing Services, your premier consulting company for all things media, where I can offer you consulting advice on how to get started, and once you get started, editing, as well as voiceover work, all for a very reasonable price. If you want to reach me, you can contact me at 917-781-6189 or the email that you see listed here. I'm always available, and I'm always willing to help. Again, 917-781-6189. Why go to some giant consulting firm that's going to charge you an arm and a leg when you can just come to me? If you want to be stress-free, the way to go is to call MC. MC Media Editing Services, your premier consulting company. And the other premier sponsor to get to, as always, is Mr. Joe Murray. If you're ever caught on the wrong end of the law, call Joe Murray. Joe's a retired NYPD police officer turned criminal defense attorney. With 15 years of experience in the NYPD from 1987 until 2002, he parlayed a successful career in the NYPD into an equally successful career as a criminal defense attorney. His website is jmurray-law.com, where you can reach him at 646-838-1702, or just email him at joe@jmurray-law.com. Good man, that Joe Murray. All right. My next guest, both in the public sector and private sector, has instructed on the importance of proper tactics and what makes him an expert. Well, 33 years, I should say, as a police officer in the streets of Los Angeles. And that's about as good an expertise as you could have, considering some of the stuff he had to see. Veteran of many different assignments across his tri-decade run with the L.A.P.D. 2016 saw the end of his career on the active law enforcement side, but he continues instructing in retirement. And I've always wanted to interview someone from the L.A.P.D., especially after all the NYPD interviews. What's the other police department we see a lot in the movies and in TV shows and fictionalized versions of L.A.? And tonight, joining me for this volume 10 of The Beat is retired L.A.P.D. officer Jack. Is it Schonely? I should have asked you before the show and docked me 10 points for this. Is it Schonely in the pronunciation?
It's Schonely, believe it or
Schonely.
not, Mike. It's Schonely. It's German, but a lot of people say Schonely. I've got a lot of pronunciations, but it's Schonely.
Schonely. And the reason I thought about that is the general manager of my beloved New York Giants, who haven't been very good to me in recent years, kind of the same thing with his last name, even though it's spelled Schoen, it's pronounced Joe Shane, not Joe Schoen. So I should have asked you that before the show. Schonely.
That's okay, Mike.
That's what we'll go with. So before anything regarding your police career, I'll ask you in a little bit about your initial interest in law enforcement. Tell me where you grew up, and did you have any family in law enforcement or any form of first responder work?
Well, I grew up in Kutztown, Pennsylvania, a small town of 5,000 people, approximately 10,000 when school's in. Kutztown University of Pennsylvania is there. So I grew up in that small town, and no, I had no relatives in law enforcement. There was people I knew. small town, you knew all the local police. And so there were people that influenced me, friends and neighbors and fathers of friends and things like that, but no relatives in that.
Hmm. So you were the first in your family on that end. And like I said, it's a small town. Everybody knows everybody. And what's interesting about that kind of a background, I should mention before I proceed, the super chat is there, friends, for those of you tuning in tonight. If you have a question, please contribute it there and I'll get to it. Is that camaraderie is instilled in you in an early age when you're growing up, when everybody knows everybody. There's a sense of family early on. There's a sense of almost duty, for lack of a better way to word it, where somebody's going through a hard time, even if they're not your relative by blood, they're in your same community. You do what you can to help them out. So I imagine in a town of 5,000, those type of values that we see with a lot of other people from similar backgrounds were instilled in you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's a good description of it. Because you know everyone, there's goods and bads to that, of course. But the good part is what you're talking about, Mike. It was that we were all close, and you had a lot of relatives local. My first best friends were my cousins, but the small town atmosphere was great. It was wonderful to grow up in Kutztown. It's a great town. You'll have to visit sometime.
No, I'll have to for sure. There's a lot of places. The more people I talk to on the show, the more I realize there's a lot of places in this country.
Oh,
Forget
yeah.
internationally, just in the country alone,
Yes.
I have to travel to someday over the course of my life. Now, certain people of a certain age, as I've covered with previous guests, will watch television shows. Either they'll see it out in the street, or they'll see a friend of a family, or they'll watch television shows and be like, "Okay, that's it. That's what I want to do." For some people, it's Hill Street Blues. Other people, it's Emergency, things like that.
Yes.
Where would you say the interest in law enforcement began, to where you thought to yourself, you know what, that seems pretty cool, and I think that's what I want to do with my life?
Adam 12. That's an easy
another
one.
Yeah.
I watched it this afternoon on Me TV or something. Adam 12 was a great influence. And it happened to be the Los Angeles Police Department. And that isn't why I ended up there, but there's a lot of other reasons. But it certainly had an influence on me. And to see that and see what they did. Of all the Hollywood TV shows on police work, Adam 12's pretty darn realistic. It shows the mundane, the routine, the boring stuff, and then it had some excitement here and there, but it was very realistic. Jack Webb was involved in that, and but yeah, Adam 12 was a big influence. And by the way, later on, after I got to LA, I have met Kent McCord, and I met Martin Milner before he passed. And I met Sharon Claridge. Sharon Claridge is the voice, the dispatcher. She was a real dispatcher in LA. I met her before I came on the job, very briefly. So that was exciting for me because as a kid, I watched those guys and I listened to Sharon do the one Adam 12, one Adam 12, very exciting. And it just, all that stuff influences you a little bit. I had other things too, but Adam 12 for sure was a big one.
Yeah, and I liken it, even though this is different because it was fictionalized and this was reality, and still is, it's still on the air. Cops, for me growing up,
Oh yeah.
was it for me, because you're seeing, and I like how you describe that, the mundane, kind of
Yeah.
less exciting parts of police work, and then it's it's the same thing in those cops episodes. You can get a vehicle pursuit in one segment where they're going 70 miles an hour on the highway, or more than that, trying to chase somebody down, and then the next segment is a domestic dispute, or some kid has his head stuck in a fence.
Yeah.
So it captured everything. It's like, that's what
That's
your
right.
24 hours or 12 hours could be on in a given sector car. So before LA, there was, you kept it local. There was a Berks County Sheriff's Office. Now this is Reading, PA, which
Correct.
a lot of people have heard of.
Yeah.
So some places it's busy, some places it's boring, some places it's that healthy mix where some days you're running around like your hair is on fire, other days are quiet and peaceful. Was Reading, PA, and the Berks County Sheriff's Office that kind of a place?
Well, for me, I was a part-timer. So, and I was still in college. This was my part-time job. And I worked at every chance I got. And I was primarily involved at the courthouse with taking defendants upstairs to court for jury trials and sentencing and plea bargains and all that. I learned a lot, by the way, doing that. It was a great base. And then transportation. And occasionally I get to go out with the full-timers and do some warrant services and things. So that was my introduction into law enforcement at Berks County Sheriff's Office. And I made some lifelong friends there. It was wonderful. And it wasn't the craziness. I wasn't a street cop or a street deputy handling calls, that sort of thing. It was mostly transportation and prisoners and dealing with that. But it was a great way to get in the door and learn the terminology and and think about tactics and safety and things. It was a great introduction.
I can imagine. Even though he's jumping ahead, we'll forgive him. That's my buddy John Latanzio on the chat. He's a retired NYPD emergency service unit cop. And he's asking, are they really called JFO on helicopters?
Yes. Yeah. That was an L.A.P.D term at air support from way back in the day. Not used anymore, not politically correct, obviously, but then Blue Thunder, which I saw before I became a Los Angeles police officer, had that. Daniel Stern was the actor, and that's talked about Jaffo. And yes, so it was real. It was taken from as much of Hollywood does. They grab things, and the questioner can certainly talk about that with NYPD related Hollywood stuff. They draw things that are real, terminologies and events, and then they just add some zing to it to make it a little bit more entertaining. But Jaffo was real.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, good to know. John, of course, a big supporter of this show, veteran of Emergency Squad 5 in Staten Island, also Emergency Squad 3 in the Bronx. So that guy was the real deal. He was previously on this show. So is there anything, even though you were, of course, as you said, you weren't on the street as much compared to others, we all have that one big call where everybody's going naturally and it sticks out to you. From that 3-year period down in Burke, is there anything that sticks out as, okay, that was a rush and that's why I came on this job?
My first use of force. First time I ever had to lay hands on somebody. I remember it like it happened yesterday. And I talk about it regularly. People ask me about it, and I can tell you the defendant's name. I can tell you so much about it, but it was my first use of force. A prisoner that was in a cell. He knows he's going up to court, and he was an older guy, big, strong, older guy though. And we told him, hey, it's time to go. And one of the older part-time deputies was in there telling him, hey, it's time to go upstairs. And he goes, I'm not going. And they go, no, you actually are going. And he said, no, I'm not. And when this older part-timer, Mickey DiBenedetto, so yeah, I mean, like that, he put hands on him, and George took a swing and hit him. And two of us, Ron Fisher and I, went in and we took care of that problem. And, but that was my first time ever using force on someone with the authority. You know what I mean? It wasn't a fight. It was a use of force, and it was pretty significant. And it just sticks in your head vividly, even though it was a nothing in the big scheme of things. To me, at that time, as a young guy in college going into law enforcement, that was a big deal.
I can imagine. And I like how you put that. We fixed that problem. Condition corrected.
Yes,
how we corrected it, you don't need to know. But it was
quickly done.
It was quickly done and quickly taken care of.
He went up to court. He went to court that day.
He went. Even if he didn't want to go, it's kind of like that kid that doesn't, he has to eat his vegetables before he can get dessert. He finished,
right.
He finished his dinner.
He did.
That was the case with that particular individual that day. Now, lateral transfers are not out of this world, but to go from one side of the country to the other, that's not usual. And I mean that in a good way. It takes a big leap of faith to do that. And you could have went to Philadelphia. Philadelphia's right there, has a lot of going on in its own right during that time frame. But you went to Los Angeles. And of course, Adam 12, you talked about watching that. Was it that, and I'll ask you a 2-part question. Was it that played a decision and you putting in for the L.A.P.D? And also, how did the opportunity to even put in for that come about in the first place?
It was, wow. So much, so many different influences. Adam 12, did that influence? Of course it did. But I went to Los Angeles for a wedding, and in May of '83, and I actually tested with San Diego PD. Let me back up. I saw there was a magazine called Police Product News back in the day. It's now Police Magazine, and they had advertisements in the back for departments all across the country. San Diego was one of them. I said, you know what? I want to go West Coast. I want to get out. I want to be on my own. I'm going to go to California. applied to them, tested with them, and then I took a tour with L.A.P.D. in May of '83. And a public relations guy met me at the front desk at Parker Center, downtown LA, and he showed me around. And he took me to communications division, the dispatch center. And that is where he handed me a headset. He plugged me into a console behind a young lady that was in front of me. She turned around, waved to me quietly, and I'm just standing there. And he's staring at me. I mean, just staring to where it was kind of odd. And he's waiting for her to talk. And when she starts talking, it's Sharon Claridge. That's the voice of Adam 12. And hook, line, and sinker. He got me. He got me. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's the Adam 12 lady. He goes, yeah. Well, that was all it took. And by the time I left that tour, I filled out an out-of-state testing card. And in August, I was in LA testing. And in November, I was standing at the academy getting screamed at. It was that quick. So it was a sequence of events, but that sure didn't hurt. That tour did not hurt. I mean, that was, he got me good, where I said, yeah, I want to come here.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. You know what? Again, it takes a big leap of faith, and now you're going to LA, and this is the other part about it. You're comfortable where you are, and that's not just you specifically. I'm saying that about we grow up somewhere, we get used to our surroundings, especially if you're from larger parts of the country. You kind of have your fill, and you're content with where you are, and there's nothing wrong with that.
No.
But to kind of explore beyond your horizons, it takes a lot, especially for a young guy. And you're going to LA during the 80s, and it was a wild place for some good reasons, some not so good reasons. This is right before crack started hitting. The Showtime Lakers and all their exploits all over Los Angeles were big back then. A lot was happening in Tinseltown. Here you are. I imagine for somebody that grew up in Pennsylvania in a small town of 5,000 to go to Hollywood and see what you were seeing at that time, just even before you got sworn in, had to be culture shock with the capital C.
It was unbelievable culture shock. And that was before like you said, that was before I had a badge and a gun belt on. But at the same time, Mike, I tell people this regularly, the feeling of being in LA and on my own, don't know anybody, in a town of millions of people, from a town of 5,000, as shocking as that kind of is, there's something in there. It's like this adrenaline thing too, where you're like, wow, I am really on my own. And it's a really incredible feeling that I can't explain. I can't truly explain it, but it was there and it was exciting. It was exciting. And I mean, this is before GPS. You didn't know, okay, I want to go to the movies. Where the heck's the movie theater? I mean, just something like that. Everything was new, exciting. Every time you got in the car and went someplace, it was brand new to your eyes, and being exposed to it and learning the city, and a city that big, that takes a long time to learn. I mean, by the time I finished my career, I knew it pretty well, but back in November of '83, I didn't know anything. I could barely get to the grocery store. So it was exciting at the same time. I loved it. I highly recommend that for people.
Flying by the seat of your pants. Sometimes you don't even know where your own address is. You know it by sight, but you don't know it by exact address yet. You haven't learned it by heart, and it takes time. Now, I've covered this before too with anybody that is going into an academy, either on the fire side or the police side, with prior experience in the field, is that you're not the average rookie. You've done this job. You've done it elsewhere, but you've done it. But there's learning what you learned down in Berks County, Pennsylvania. And as the old saying goes, we're not in Kansas anymore, Toto. Now you have to learn how to police West Coast style and LA style at that. So from that time frame in the academy where you're getting screamed at, but you're also getting life lessons too that are going to help you on the beat, what are some of the biggest things you learned that made you say, wow, that's how they do it out here?
Wow, that's a great question, Mike, because it certainly is different police style of policing. The fact that I had a little bit of experience in Berks, that was great, but because it wasn't patrolling, everything in that area was new to me about patrolling and stopping vehicles and, this building searches and all that. So it wasn't a hard transition. I just had to really pay attention. But I tell this to recruits that I train all the time. When they make a mistake and they start beating themselves up, I say, hey, stop. Come here. I need to talk to you. The best lessons I learned from the academy, 1983 into 84, were my mistakes. I don't remember my successes. I remember my mistakes. As long as you fix them and you consciously acknowledge the mistake and you go, I'm not letting that happen again, everything's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. These mistakes are going to actually be valuable to you. And the one that I use as an example regularly is a good guy, bad guy target on Hogan's Alley. It's live fire with targets that are moving and popping up. And all of a sudden, a target pops up. I can see it like it happened yesterday. It's a female, long red hair, red tank top with a gun. And she pops up, and I put 2 in the 10 ring. I mean, 2 good shots in the 10 ring. And suddenly the instructor is screaming at me. Schonely, what's wrong with you? And Mike Diaz is screaming at me. And he was an intimidating guy. Became friends with him later, but intimidating guy. And he goes, what are you doing? And I look up and I'm like, why is he yelling at me? I didn't see that in her other hand was a badge. Talk about a lesson. I just shot a deputy. And I remember what he said. He was a funny guy too. He said, Schonely, I know she's just a deputy, but, and he's trying to make it fun, but he goes, we don't shoot law enforcement here in Los Angeles. Do you understand me? And I had to do this big write-up and explaining my mistake, explaining how I was going to fix it. But I'll tell you, Mike, there is no doubt in my mind that event helped me in the future through the next 30 years, where you're evaluating your target a little bit more carefully. It takes a split second, but you evaluated your target better. And I had some cases where I did not pull the trigger. And I thought back and thought, wow, thank goodness that happened to me in the academy. And thank goodness Mike Diaz screamed at me, because I think this event may have turned out differently had I not learned that lesson before it was life or death. It's just paper. Right. It's just paper target when I did it. So that's a good example of the academy and how, there was many other things, but obviously that one sticks with me. All the names pop in your head. This is 40 years ago. And I can see that target. I can hear Mike Diaz in my ear. It's just vivid because it was a serious mistake. And I earned it and took credit for it, took responsibility and fixed it.
And I'm glad you brought it up, because if you go on the Officer Down Memorial page, how many causes of death for these line of duty deaths for these officers do you see? Gunfire, but in parentheses, inadvertent. And then you click on the story and it's heartbreaking. They were mistaken for a suspect. It's common theme. They were mistaken for this. They were mistaken for that. The responding officer thought he or she was this and they weren't. Or they fired in not realizing that it was a police officer, and they end up dying. And it's a very tragic circumstance to where it's happened on a number of occasions. I think of it on a lesser note, because this wasn't real life, an episode of Miami Vice where the Crockett character is running and he's chasing after a perp in the street. He's not in uniform. The responding officers pull their gun on him and he screams, I'm a cop. I'm a cop. It's stuff like that, though, where that's a TV show, but it's a perfect demonstration. It can go bad. And you don't want, listen, if you could avoid shooting someone, even if it's justified, that's a great thing. Even in justified shootings, we see how much it bothers officers, how much more so when it's a brother or sister officer.
Yes. Blue on blue. It's called blue on blue. There's blue on blue deaths almost annually. And some of them are training accidents. Those are inexcusable. But many of them are what you just described with Crockett. Where an undercover or an off-duty officer or an on-duty officer is in a fluid situation. You get into a crossfire, don't realize it, and suddenly you're looking at a gun and you're not putting the 2 and 2 together and saying, oh, that's an officer at the other end of that gun. You're just seeing the gun. Well, maybe that lesson in the academy fixed me on that. So I was able to go through without having something tragic and terrible happen later in life.
Yeah. And as you're saying that, just a last note on it, I'm thinking about 2 cases in New York City. Brian Simonson, Brian Mulkeen, same exact thing. Armed robbery situation with Detective Simonson. He's got his gun pointed at the suspect. The suspect turned out to have a fake gun. You don't know that in the moment.
That's right.
Responding officers just saw a gun. Detective Simonson was in front, and one of those bullets from the responding officer struck and killed Detective Simonson. Same year, later that year, another Brian Mulkeen in uniform, or he's a street crime cop, I believe. He might have been in plainclothes rather, but just pulled up, is wrestling with the suspect that doesn't want to go to jail, may have a gun on him too. The officers fire while they're wrestling on the ground, and Brian is struck by those bullets from them and
Yeah,
ends up dying as well. So, as you said, it happens, and it's
it
important
does.
that
Tragic,
you'd
but it
you'd
happens.
rather have it in the academy when it's a paper target, like you said, and have it out on the street. So finally, you get out on the street in 1984, and it's the 77th Street Division. There was a documentary on the 77th Street Division made in the early 90s that's on YouTube. I highly recommend everybody go watch that because it gives you a glimpse at how crazy that place
Yeah,
was. It's
it was.
almost like a police department smack dab in the middle of a war zone. I mean, that was Beirut back in the days.
It
So
was.
tell me about going there. We talked about culture shock. All right, we're going to put you on the beat, and we're going to put you on arguably the most dangerous beat in the city. Have fun.
Yeah. Well, I had to back up one notch and say when I got out of the academy, I went to another division first for probation. I went to Foothill out in the valley. Foothill was I would say a busy valley division, and it was a good place to learn. It wasn't crazy where you were running with your hair on fire constantly,
Right.
but there was things happening. So I had a good base there. But then I requested to go to 77th and when I got off probation, and I did. And I got there in 85 and in the middle of chaos. I mean, it was the Wild West. Um, it was just really busy. Crack cocaine at its peak. Drive-bys nightly. Wasn't unusual to go to a shooting call and there's 3 to 5 people laying there with hits, and one dies and 4 live or 2 die. I mean, multi homicides were not unusual. Um, right over my shoulder, right over here, is a belt buckle from 1986, and it has a number on it: 160 homicides in 77th Street. 77th Division was one of 18 patrol divisions. Precincts would be the NYPD term. One of 18 precincts, patrol divisions, and we had 160 homicides. It's a record. It'll never be broken. I bet they had 30 last year. It was the Wild West, but it was a chance to have an exciting time, whether you liked it or not. And you learned so much in a short period of time because of volume. I mean, you'd check in on the old MDTs, the computers, and boom, immediately your whole buffer was full with calls, and that doesn't count what you're initiating on your own. And if you weren't arresting a felony a night, you were kind of looked at as a slacker. I mean, and it wasn't hard. It
Right.
wasn't hard because there was so much dope being slung on the corners, out in the open, lots of stolen cars, lots of carjackings, lots of shootings. Exciting, fun, terrible for the people that had to live there. But we tried to make that better. And I believe we did. I truly believe that. We were really appreciated by the people that lived there. The good people that lived in 77th loved us. They loved us. We were very assertive, proactive, and we kept it from being even worse than it was.
Oh yeah, and I'd say you made the difference because look at that, 186, one life loss is one too many, but
Yeah.
186 down to 30, yeah, that's improvement, and hats off to you for that. Because, and I like how you brought that up too, because it kind of kills one of the questions I wanted to ask you, but that's fine. In that, there's that balance you need to have as a patrol officer. To where,
Yeah.
are you at war to a degree? Yes, you have
Yeah.
drug gangs, you got drug dealers, you got some bad people living in that area. But you
Yes.
mentioned the good people too, and who
Oh,
are
they
you
were
fighting
great.
for in this war? You're fighting for them.
Yeah.
Not just for your fellow officers, you're fighting for them. That's who you're protecting. That's who you're
Yeah.
helping. That's who you're making their lives tenable for.
Yeah, and we took that seriously. We really took that seriously because we
Mhm.
knew we were appreciated by those people. The media didn't appreciate us. They beat us up every day. I
Yeah.
ignored that. I listened to the neighborhood watch people that would invite us in for a barbecue or for breakfast, or just come over and say, "Thank you, officer. Thank you for being here." That happened all the time at 77th, all the time. Uh, Even though we were out there putting a lot of people in jail and doing our best, and there was officer involved shootings, there was all sorts of stuff going on. The good people supported us.
Hmm. No, of course. And I wanted to ask you about quality arrest, right? As a beat cop, especially back then, you're gonna make them, and you got to learn how to enforce. It's one
Yeah,
thing to walk the street. It's not like okay, and sometimes this can happen in the theater of the absurd. You're walking down the street, somebody walks past you, and a crack pipe falls out. Okay, you're going to you're going to
yeah,
central booking.
yeah,
But there's other times where you got to have a keen eye. And you got to make your presence felt, especially as a newbie, because these criminals, they're smart. They're making dumb life choices, but
yes.
they're smart. They know their area. They know it better than the rookie cop that's in there and has to learn it. So they're trying to feel you out. Is he soft? Is he hardcore?
Yeah.
Can I mess with him? Can I get my advantage over him? Obviously, in your case, you got to put your foot down and say, no, you cannot. So what's the first arrest that you can recall making where it was a quality arrest, a felony, and you quickly felt, man, okay, I established myself. I took a big step towards credibility on this block.
Wow, that's hard to remember because there were so many arrests. But I can tell you that it was very likely narcotics related, and it was very likely that I was working 12 Adam 31 with Roger Gilbert, who taught me so much. I mean, veteran officer, and he taught me the ropes of 77th, and he was very into getting these crack cocaine dealers, and we would set up uh, in a place where we knew they would run to from a certain selling location. We did this all the time, and a lot of officers didn't. We'd park the car, walk a couple blocks, and we'd go to a place that we knew they would run to, and then we'd call another unit and say, "Hey, come on in and drive past, 71st and Bryanhurst," and they'd say, "Okay," and they'd drive past, and they'd run into us. I mean, we'd be in a back alley someplace, and they'd run right into our arms, and we did that a lot, and we got a reputation for doing that. And the bad guys knew who we were. They didn't like us. They had all sorts of things that they called us, but our favorite was his name was Gilbert, and I'm Schonely. They would call us Giblet and Schonely, and they couldn't pronounce our names either. But they didn't like us at all because we
Yeah.
ruined their days. And that was rolling 60 Crips that we were dealing with
Mm.
every night, and we were taking guns off of people regularly. That was just the way it was in 77. It was
Right.
busy and exciting. Remember, young cop, Kutztown, Los Angeles, South Central now. Oh my gosh, I'm taking guns off of people and arresting them for dope and being in stolen cars and pursuits and foot pursuits and all this. It was really exciting. I'd give anything to go back in time and live that period again, especially knowing what I know now. I'd have even greater success and I'd be safer because I did a lot of stupid things back then. Tactically, I learned a lot of lessons the hard way.
No, of course. And listen, if the bad guys don't like you, it's kind of like the heel in wrestling. It means
Oh,
you're doing your job.
yeah.
If the crowd's
Oh,
booing
yeah.
you, then yeah, you're doing what you're supposed to be doing.
Oh,
And in that
yeah.
case, you were doing it to aplomb. And you mentioned pursuits. When people think of Los Angeles naturally, because a pursuit
Yeah.
comes in, there's a news copter over the air within seconds. Obviously, as we'll talk about later on with your air support years, you guys are overhead. LA is different. That it's a big city that even though it's crowded, you do have to worry about foot traffic and certainly be cognizant of that. It leaves more room compared to other cities. You can't chase people with that frequency in Chicago or Boston, definitely New York City. So when you look back on your first pursuit, which is almost synonymous with the LAPD, what was it like and what was it for?
It was a stolen car, and it was thrilling. it was thrilling. I mean, where you had to really concentrate to control yourself so that when you keyed the mic, you didn't sound like an idiot.
Mhm.
You sounded like, yeah, I got this. Even though inside you were going, oh my gosh, you wanted to scream, but you couldn't because everybody's listening. They're all judging you, but it was thrilling, and it it's one of the problems with pursuits is because they're so adrenaline filled that when they terminate, officers sometimes make bad choices, and it's because of that adrenaline that's pumping. It's hard to explain, except that you feel like you're in a movie, you feel like it's Hollywood because you've seen it all these years, and now you're in it. Uh, and then the next one gets a little bit easier, and the next one's a little calmer, and the next one's a little calmer. And by the time you get to 25 or 30 of these things, it's like, this is no big deal. Whether you're driving or the passenger broadcasting, it was nothing. And then years later, I'm calling it from the air. I mean, it became almost routine. And I hate the word routine, but I will use it in that occasionally and say that it became almost routine because there were so many pursuits.
I can imagine, and again, watching Cops, they did so many episodes back then in the early to mid 90s with the LAPD and with surrounding police departments too. They did a few with Pomona, which were outstanding, and I think a couple
Yeah.
with San Diego, but a lot with you guys in the LAPD. And it was the same thing. I mean, there was one where they're chasing a motorcycle in heavy traffic. And I guess these guys have been partners for a while because it's kind of like a bickering married couple. And it was funny to where the guy that's driving is trying to key for the radio and his passenger looks at him, again, calm as day. I got it.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
let me
Yeah.
do the radio. And again, as
Yeah.
you said, to your point, it becomes a routine after a while to where
It
you're
does.
still cognizant of the dangers. You don't get complacent. But
Yeah.
once you've been in your first few, it's kind of like riding a bike. Once you know how to do that, hey, okay, the adrenaline wears off after a while to a healthy degree, and you can lock in and do what you need to do.
Exactly. And that banter is very real between partners. Uh, a lot of people ask me over the years, did you like the movie End of Watch? And I've seen it, and it was entertaining, and I liked it, but it's not realistic. I mean, those guys are in Medal of Valor capers every day, which is silliness. But the thing that I would tell people is the banter between them is real. That's how cops are. That's how they talk to each other in the car. That's how they act. They make fun of each other. They kid each other, but they love each other. And they would take a bullet for each other.
Mhm.
Not every partner, but the vast majority of partners you would take a bullet for. And it's absolutely true. And people don't understand. Some people don't understand that camaraderie. Certain military folks understand it. Cops understand it. First responders in general, firefighters understand it. You're in a burning building together. You're depending on each other. Yeah, they understand that camaraderie and the banter and the fun and the love and the respect. It's all inclusive there.
Mm-hmm. And since you mentioned firefighters, let me just give a quick shout out to the department I work for as their media specialist, the West Haven Fire Department, who did a great job last night on a second alarm blaze that they went to without me, but that's okay. I forgive them.
Wow.
It was after my work hours had ended. Of course, I'm the white cloud. So I went home and I'm listening to the scanner and I hear the job come in and I'm like, okay, terrific.
Sorry you missed it, Mike.
Yeah.
You'll get the next one. You'll get the next
Great job, guys. But that's okay. So real quick, before I get to your transition to Vice in 1990, this was an interesting little wrinkle in your career in that you were back to Pennsylvania for a year, 88 to 89 with the Bureau of Narcotics in Harrisburg. You're having a blast doing what you're doing with the LAPD. So tell me about this little detail in your career, why you went back home briefly.
Temporary insanity. And it involves an ex-wife. Do I have to say anything else, Mike?
No.
It's
not if you don't want to.
It's a long story. It's something I didn't want to do. I did for someone else, and it didn't work. And I immediately applied to come back. The positive thing was that while I was back in Pennsylvania doing the Bureau of Narcotics with the Attorney General's office, I met my current wife again. We had known each other before. We bumped back into each other, and the rest is history in a positive way. So there was a good thing that came out of that, and her name is Tracy. That's the good thing that came out of it. But yeah, that was tough. But I applied to come back on pretty quickly, and believe it or not, it took me longer to get on the job the second time than the first time. It's insane. And when I did come back, I had to go through a few days of training, and because I wasn't gone that long, and the guy said, "Where do you want to go?" And I said, "Back to 77th. He goes, "Are you crazy?" I go, "Hey, that's where my brothers and sisters are. I got to go back to 77th." And I did. He said, "Approved." And I went back, and it wasn't like starting over completely, but there were some new people there that I didn't know and that didn't know me. And it was kind of interesting. But I was glad to get back to 77th.
I can imagine. Well, before I transition to Vice, I was going to say just a little quick wrinkle. When you apply the first time, of course, you get your credentials, you get certified. How long do those last you? Because when you tried to get back on the second time, were those certifications still valid?
They are. It's
Okay.
it's a statewide thing called Police Officer Standards and Training.
Okay.
And I was still current enough to do that. I don't know the time limit. It's several years, believe it or not. And I was gone 1 year and 3 months. So everything was still good, and I left in good standing. The sergeant that saw my application to come back, I actually worked for in 77th. He had transferred to personnel, and he called me personally and said, Are you freaking kidding me? I can't wait to get you back. And he expedited some things for me to get me back, and it still took a while. But yeah, it wasn't a big deal. Nothing really changed that year and 3 months at all. I was the same bad guys, same good guys, and same stuff going on.
No, of course. And Black and Blue in the chat is saying it's 3 years, and he would know. That's Dale Peters, by the way, folks. If you want to check out his podcast, it's called Black and Blue, and highly recommend. He does a lot of great interviews on that forum. So, Dale, it's good to see you here. I'm a big fan of your work and a big fan of what you do. So, appreciate you chiming in the chat.
Cool. Thanks, Dale.
Producer Victor asked a good question as well, and I want to highlight it here. He's asking regarding retirement benefits and how that works. And thank you, because I didn't even think about that, Vic.
That was it complicated things. Let's just say that. I had to buy, because they paid out an amount when I left after 4 years and 3 months. I left, and they paid me that. And then when I came back, they said, "You can pay us that back." I said, "Are you kidding me? I'm going to use this for down payment on a condo." And eventually I bought it back. And so I got credit for those 4 years and 3 months. Plus I bought back the 6 months from the academy so I could retire on time. But that's a good question, Jack. Very, very insightful. That's important. You don't think that's important when you're young, but it's sure important later in your career. And I'm glad I did what I did.
Yeah, because it seemed, and thank you, Victor, for that question. Like I said, he makes my life very easy on this show, both with his production skills and his insightful questions. But it's good to know, because as many guys and gals will tell you when they get on the job, you're not thinking about retirement. You just started, or even 4 or 5 years into it. It seems so far away, but as everyone that's been on this show can tell you, and yourself included, goes by like that, and you blink. Holy crap, it's been 30 years, 35 years.
You cannot believe when it gets there, you go, I'm done. This, oh my goodness. And it does go quickly. It really, it went like a lightning bolt. It just does. And it's hard to tell that to young officers. I was told it. I didn't believe it. I just didn't believe it. I go, you're crazy. You old man, go away.
Yeah.
They were right. I should have listened. I would have invested better and done some things differently.
Right. No, of course. So it's been 40 minutes into the conversation. We haven't even touched on Vice yet. That's how I know this is going great. We spent so much time on 77 alone. We could spend the whole show on 77.
Oh, yeah. 77th was great. Great cops. Great cops. I learned so much from all of them. I'm still friends with so many of them. It's a special place, a special bond from a special time. The 80s and into the early 90s, that was when it was happening there. And in not necessarily a good way, but to be a street cop, it was exciting and fun and rewarding. And you were putting bad people in jail. There were some really bad people that I got to put handcuffs on. I mean, multi-murderers, and you just felt good about what you were doing. It was a great time.
And here's what the community does when you do that.
Yeah.
And there's nothing better, like we talked about.
Absolutely.
So Vice is interesting in that, say what you will about the war on drugs. That's a different discussion for a different day. But the common theme is this. People are fed up. They're fed up with users. They're fed up with dealers. Nobody wants to see that, especially if you're trying to raise a family, or even if it's just a single person. You don't want to see that when you step out your front door. Yeah. So Vice is important because to these people that are in the act of selling it, users, it's a different, more complicated story, very tragic one. But for dealers, it's a business. They're looking at it. It's just another means to make money. To them, it's just as common as opening up a business like a grocery store or whatever the case may be, a cafe. So for you, spending time there with two vices at work, the drugs and the prostitutes, which is another tragic layer as well. Yeah. Tell me about why you wanted to go there, and just that year alone, taking down stuff, taking down basically quality of life enforcement, if you will. Yeah.
So in Los Angeles, vice is a little bit different term. It isn't what Miami Vice is. There was no narcotic stuff unless you stumbled upon it. Unless you walked out of it. For instance, it was all prostitution. Bar checks, bar violations, that sort of thing. Narcotics handled all the dope stuff. Unless you happened to come out of let's say Jack came out of a 7-Eleven with his partner, Jim Marshall, and they watch a celebrity purchase rock cocaine. Then you could get involved in narcotics. And we did. That was Rick James. My only celebrity
Of
arrest.
course. I'm not shocked.
It didn't go anywhere because he swallowed the evidence. But
Sounds like him.
it was
Cocaine's a hell of a drug.
That's right. That's right. It's amazing how many younger people will ask me, "Well, who did you arrest? Any celebrities?" Like, I only arrested one, Rick James, and they know it because of Chappelle. They don't know it because of Super Freak. They know it because of Chappelle. And then I said, "Well, it's the cocaine it's a terrible drug." I mean, he actually said that, and it's funny because years later, Rick cleaned up. He did, and he was with the same gal. And my partner Jim that day, years later, bumped into him on an alarm call at his house, and they got to meet each other again. And he remembered Jim and said, "Oh man, I remember that night. Oh man, I'm so glad I cleaned up, and I'd be dead by now." And by this time, Rick's kind of a big guy, and he doesn't look the same. And then he passed not long after that. But
he died young, unfortunately.
He did. And Jim will tell you that when he met him at his house, he was wonderful. He wasn't very happy with us that night until he knew he was going to get released. And then he sang for us in the back of the car. I mean, it was hilarious. It's another memory where I just vividly listening to Super Freak by Rick James in my backseat. Pretty cool.
I do have to say this since you mentioned it. He's a habitual line stepper. He steps the line habitually. That's one of my favorite lines of anything. Movies, TV shows. Yes. I say habitual line stepper at least twice every week.
That's great.
You made my night. Thank you so much.
Good. And that was a fluke, by the way. We were in the 7-Eleven getting a Coke in the middle of the day. We were driving around in plain clothes, obviously. We're in shorts and Hawaiian shirts in a Mustang 5.0 convertible. And that just happened. But Vice in Hollywood was primarily prostitution. And in the 80s and into the 90s, when I was there, the prostitution was, out on the street. It was off the hook crazy. So the Hollywood Vice unit was a great place to work. It was a great place to show that you were responsible. If you went and did your tour there, and they limited you to 18 months, you could not do more than 18 for obvious reasons. So, you're being sent into bars with money. You're being sent into all sorts of situations where, if you're not doing it right, you could get in trouble. And so if you come out of there with a good, solid 18 months of doing a good job, it was a good way to promote, and a good thing that they would look and go, "Ooh, they worked the Vice tour." So that was one of the reasons I did it. I had a friend that was a supervisor there that kind of recruited me, and I had a blast. I mean, it was fun. I didn't think I was very good at it. I thought they all saw through me. It was like you pull up and you're talking to these prostitutes, and they all say, "Are you a cop?" And you were allowed to tell them, "No, I'm not a cop." Not like the movies where they say, "Oh, you have to tell them the truth." No, you don't. You could tell them, "No, I'm not a cop." And I thought they all saw through me, but I got better and better at it. Some guys were gifted at it because they had the real gift at talking, but it was fun. It was something different, and it got you out of the patrol mode as a little bit of a relief from the radio call after radio call after radio call. It was nice.
No, and I'll tell you, it's not with these instances. Although a lot of these women are attractive, it's not like Julia Roberts and Pretty Woman.
No.
These are, I said, these are very tragic stories, and you get to know these girls. They're on drugs. They come from bad homes, and I can understand. Besides the obvious reasons that you alluded to earlier, I can understand why officers don't want to spend more or can't spend more than 18 months there, just from the mental standpoint. You see that over and over again. It breaks you down after a while. It makes you sad.
It does. I was ready to go after a year. I really was. It was like, okay, I've seen enough of this. But I did my full tour, but. And that would happen. Jim and I, one day on day watch, we came across this young girl, just this beautiful young girl, and she solicited us. She gave us the violation in like 2 seconds, and we're like, and she goes, "But before we go to the room, we're going to go grab a room. Before we go, we need to stop for beer." And Jim and I were like, "Okay, we'll stop for beer." Well, we drove right by the liquor store and pulled into the parking lot at the police station. We hook her up, and she's stunned. It was her first day ever being out there. Her life had just fallen apart. It was her first day out there. She's got to make some money. And by the end of it, I mean, she was appreciative that we stopped it that day. I mean, she was very appreciative. And, you just saw lives like that. And it was troubling. It was
Yeah.
really troubling. And as interesting as it is at times, it was good that it was a short tour and got out of that.
Yeah, no, and I can see that. I can see why. 1991 to 1997 is an interesting leg in your career because you split times. We were talking about off the air between the Division B, among several others. Division B was your assignment, also K-9, which came later. For those not familiar with the setup of Los Angeles, and Joe Maliga, I do see your question, by the way. I'll get to it momentarily. What does the Division B area cover, and why is it referred to as that?
Okay, so it was Boy Platoon
Mhm.
as part of Metropolitan Division.
Okay.
They call it Metro. So
Right.
Metropolitan Division or Metro was a citywide division. And they had a Boy Platoon and Charlie Platoon, two different platoons of crime suppression. And I was part of Boy Platoon. So Boy Platoon, we would, as Charlie Platoon, we would go to places like Hollywood calls and says, hey, we're having a street robbery problem. We need Metro. And we would saturate Hollywood and everything that moves gets stopped. I mean, and we would go out and very aggressively and proactively and visibly attack specific problems, crime suppression wise. If you had a warrant, you were going to jail. If you were out robbing and we caught you, you're going to jail. In addition to that, Metro Boy Platoon would also do bank stakeouts, where we would sit in banks and wait for them to get robbed. At that time, in the 90s, LA was the bank robbery capital of the United States because freeways are right next to almost every bank.
Yeah.
So you come out of the bank that you just robbed and you're on a freeway and you're 10 miles away before the unit gets there. You're far away. So we would set up on banks, inside and outside, and wait for them to get robbed. We did that from time to time. We did VIP security. I mean, I got to meet Gorbachev. I met Gorbachev
Wow.
doing a VIP security. I met George Bush 41 guarding a door in the basement of a hotel. I mean, we supplemented the Secret Service when they would come to town. We would help them. So we did a variety of things, and then we were also riot control, crowd control, that sort of thing. It was a really good unit. And within Metro, I'll just touch on this.
Sure.
Also in Boy Platoon and Charlie Platoon, crime suppression, and the things we talked about. And then SWAT was in there, which was D Platoon. If you ever hear D Platoon, that's SWAT in LA, D Platoon. E Platoon, equestrian, the mounted unit, and K9 Platoon, obviously K9. So that was all part of Metro as well. But you came into Metro and you went into B and C, and then some people stayed there and others would filter out and go to SWAT, go to K9, go to mounted, or promote, whatever you chose to do. As we're going to talk about, I'm sure, I went to K9 from Boy Platoon because that's what I wanted to do.
Oh, yeah. And during this time, you have Watts and you have Rodney King. And Rodney King, I mean, we all know how that went down. And it's unfortunate when the actions of a few ruin it for everybody else because you look at it and it's just like, okay, great. Now they all think we're like this. And we know that's not the case. But the city, talk about a city on edge, man. That was one of the biggest tests, not just of that decade, but ever the department faced. And talk about personal stress. You're out there. You don't know what's going to happen. We talked about war zones. This is a war zone on steroids when this went down. So tell me about working through that.
Well, I can tell you that every street cop I knew in 92 knew that was coming. I mean, there were politicians and media and, people that don't know anything talking about how, oh my gosh, we didn't know this was coming. We all knew it was coming. If that verdict was going to go the way we predicted it was going to go, we all thought that it was going to happen that way. We knew things were going to explode because we were talking to people. We're out there. We're feeling the heat. We were already getting chipped at and yelled at and accused of things. So the day that the riots kicked off, when the verdict came back, Boy Platoon was training for crowd control at a fire station in North Hollywood. And somebody brought a little black and white Panasonic TV with the big antenna on it. And we watched the verdict. And as soon as we heard it, we went, here we go. Here we go. This is going to explode. And we got sent to South Central. I happened to get I remember where I went. I went down MLK Boulevard to Crenshaw, and I will never forget that. The number of people on the streets and the sidewalks, there was hundreds of people where you normally you'd see 5. And it was like, oh my gosh, this is really going to explode. And then we all rallied at a command post at a bus depot, and then it exploded, and we started getting sent out to different events from that command post.
And this is during a time when you saw some horrifying things. We can all recall the Reginald Denny incident. Here's a guy, he was talking about wrong place, wrong time. When people say that, I think of him because he picked a really bad time to drive through that particular neighborhood, and it didn't go so well for him. And then there's that come down effect, where it's like, okay, after it quells down, the rest of the world forgets about it. The rest of the country forgets about it. You don't forget about it because now you got to quite literally pick up the pieces and get moving again.
Yeah.
When was the first time after that where you felt, okay, I feel like the beat is kind of back to normal now?
Wow. It was months. It was months. Even though it was out of the news within a few weeks, it was months. And to be honest with you, Mike, it probably was years. And someone could argue that to this day, there's still remnants, because there are still, I can picture them on Vermont Avenue, concrete slabs where there used to be big buildings. And those are concrete slabs that happened in 1992, and they never got rebuilt. So there's still remnants that remind you of that time. It was a frustrating week. I remember being very frustrated. We weren't allowed to really do what we were trained to do. We were being held back. They were scared. Command was scared. Politicians were scared that we would go out and make it worse. Florence and Normandy is where Reginald Denny happened. I was within blocks of Florence and Normandy with a platoon of heavily armed officers heading there, and we were told not to go. I remember them asking our lieutenant, can you go in there and not use deadly force? And he laughed at them and said, there's bullets skipping off the street we're standing next to. I can't guarantee you that. Are you kidding me? This is violence out here. It's a riot. And we didn't go. We were told to come back to the command post. It was really frustrating. The department was really restrained from doing what we were trained to do. Now, there were exceptions to that. A whole bunch of people that were on a day off from Metro, for instance, they came in and formed their own group, and they went out and they got into all sorts of stuff. I mean, they got into shootings and arresting, mass arrests, and really made a difference. But those of us that were working, we got restrained a lot. I did a lot of escorting firefighters that first 24 hours because they were getting shot at too. There was actually a firefighter struck in the neck, a tiller. I worked for his brother, Jim Miller. Was later, he was one of my captains, and his brother was that tiller that got shot in the neck. So we would go out and escort firefighters to all the fires because there was dozens and dozens and dozens of fires. But it was a tough week in a lot of ways.
I can imagine. And you bring up an interesting point. I recall something that there's a documentary done by the late, great Dennis Smith, who's the author of the iconic fire service book, Report from Engine Company 82. He worked in the busiest engine company in the Bronx and in the world during the 70s. And in the documentary, the Bronx is burning. There's a black firefighter talking about, well, you would think somebody asked him, well, I can understand why they're targeting the police or whatever, but why would they target the fire department? It's like, you have to understand, they don't differentiate between the uniform. They just see a person in uniform and think you're with the quote unquote establishment. And in comes those insults, and in comes that debris, and in come those bullets. Even if you're doing something entirely different, it could even be EMS. They just see the uniform and something goes off, and it's that rage that comes out at the wrong target. At the wrong target.
There were paramedics asking us, do you have an extra vest? And if you did, you handed it to a paramedic because they were going to, they had to still go to the calls. There's still heart attacks happening. There's still people that are getting injured from non-riot related stuff. And they were, we would escort them as well. It was crazy. It was a crazy week.
K9 is interesting because, man, there's nothing better. And having a four-legged partner, not only Is it a four-legged partner on patrol? But it's family. You take that dog home with you in most instances, and it becomes
Yeah.
part of not only your family out in the beat, it becomes part of your family at home. So
Yep.
this is a refreshing thing to go from Vice to who doesn't like puppies, and they're not
That's
puppies,
right.
but you know what I mean.
I know what you mean.
So it's a wonderful transition and kind of like a breath of fresh air, especially after Rodney King. So it takes a lot to be a canine officer, the training that goes into it, and the fact, like I mentioned, that dog is your responsibility 24/7, 365 for the rest
Correct.
of your and their lives. So
Correct.
tell me about wanting to go there and what prompted that.
Well, what prompted it is my first canine search in 1985. I remember, again, I remember it vividly. Jay Moberly, legendary canine handler and a good friend, and someone who I have so much respect for. I went on a search with Jay and his dog Urko, and I watched that and I went, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I am going to do this someday. And many years later, well, not that many years later, 7, 8 years later, bam, I had the opportunity. I applied. I went on a lot of ride alongs. I learned a lot. I volunteered to hide. I did all the stuff that most canine handlers do to get into the unit, and got in there and worked one dog, Gundo. And what an amazing 5 years that was. It was hard work, long hours, call outs all the time, but you were at the tip of the spear. I mean, in LA, dog search for it's all felons, armed misdemeanors, any felony or armed misdemeanor, and that's it. So you're looking for armed suspects all the time, known to be armed. So it's high risk, but you have that dog that makes it, that mitigates a lot of that risk. Not all of it, but a lot of it. And it was an adventure. And you had to train constantly. When you weren't searching, you were training to search. You were working on obedience. You were working on scent. You were working on car stuff. There was always something, agility, always something to do with the dog when you weren't actually on a search. And when you weren't doing all that, you were cleaning the car out. I mean,
Yeah.
dog hair and and all the other things that come off of it and out of a dog. You had to clean that. It was hard. It was a hard job, but one of the most rewarding things I ever did. Got to be involved in a lot of cool stuff. A lot of bad guys went to jail that would not have been found without that dog. Guaranteed, 100%. You're never going to find that guy except that a dog is telling you, I'm telling you he's in that wall. And sure enough, the guy's in the wall where he got in through the attic and slid down between the 2x4. I mean, crazy stuff. You get to learn a lot about how desperate criminals are and how creative they are, and the places that they hid. It was fascinating. It was fascinating. Great 5 years. Great job.
Oh, of course, it sounds like it. And there's a couple stories that jog my memory as you recall that. In that, again, episode of Cops is the first one, Sacramento, 1993. There's a call. I think there's a guy, he had fled from a pursuit. He crashed a car and took off. And they corner him. They have a general idea where he is. Police, come out. Silence. Police, if you don't come out, the dog's going to go in. More silence. All right, the dog's going in. Not even 10 seconds later. And out comes that guy, and he's got a dog bite. He's like, why didn't you come out until the dog got you? It's like, I didn't hear you. You did.
Yeah.
And then we heard you when that dog, decided that you looked awfully tasty. But to your point about, how intelligent they are, this is a bomb dog story. My buddy Dan McNally, who was a retired bomb squad member, him and his partner, Claude Richards, who unfortunately got killed on 9/11 in the line of duty, they were doing a security sweep in the UN with one of their dogs. And as they're going down an empty hallway, there's no closets or doors on the side. It's just a straight corridor. The dog stops, sits down, and looks up, not at them, past them at the ceiling. And they're kind of looking at each other like, why is she looking at the ceiling?
Right.
So they get something at a chair. They go up there. They, get into the ceiling. And it wasn't a bomb, but there was a briefcase in that ceiling that she thought was suspicious. And she picked up on that. Whereas they're just walking. It's an empty corridor. She stopped, just looked up.
Yeah.
So it's amazing the capabilities, rather be explosive detection, rather be narcotics or general patrol.
Yeah.
The value they've brought to police services around the world can never be properly articulated.
You can't. Last year, California tried to ban all canines used to find people. The state of California tried to do that. And they did. It did not get to a vote, thankfully, but it's going to come back. And and the amount of ignorance that was involved in that, they had no idea how many lives are saved, including bad guys. I mean, think about it. If a dog goes into a backyard and finds a suspect hiding, maybe there's a bite. Not always. We were finding bark. They would go in and bark. And if the suspect didn't move, they didn't get bit. But if you're walking in there and you step on that suspect, there's probably going to be some force used. So the dogs actually, they have value beyond what the average citizen understands. And I think most people don't believe that we would not find a good percentage of these people without that dog's nose. That nose is an amazing thing. They get sent and they are telling you something. And there are times when you do not believe them as a handler. You go, what are you doing? Why are you goofing around over here? And then 10 minutes later, you find the suspect. You go, oh my gosh, they knew. I didn't know. I'm just a dumb human. This dog knew that they were there because he was telling me, that they were there. And I didn't believe it because it didn't make sense to me. I'm using human common sense. Well, the dog's nose is much more powerful than human common sense.
No, of course. And again, it's amazing what they can do. And that's our little guy. That's my nephew, Jax. And he's not a police canine, but yeah, he's a smart dog. Yes, he is. He's smart. I'll be sitting there eating dinner, and I don't tell him I'm putting the food together. Nothing, because he's a little beggar, even though he's treated very well. Yeah. And I feel like a little tap. I look down. You see me standing right here. Yeah. So just in general, those little guys are just amazing. A couple questions I want to highlight in the chat before we proceed. One of them is a running joke between Joe Maliga and myself. Joe's a retired correctional officer, and that is anytime I get a fire or police guest, he wants to know, did you ever help deliver a baby?
No. And it's, right. I did not. I only know a few people that did. And now I know a lot of cops at other jurisdictions that have done that, but keep in mind, big city, the paramedics are minutes away, no matter where you are. You call for a paramedic and you go, I'd like a paramedic at Broadway and Florence. And you unkey the mic and you look up and there they are. I mean, it's like their response time was really fast. So no, I didn't deliver a baby. My son became an EMT in Bakersfield. He delivered multiple babies as an EMT on a rig. And he asked me, oh, you must have done that at some point. No, I didn't. I'm glad I didn't have to.
I want to say it would have been nice after the fact, but not in the moment. In the moment, it's right. A little stressful. You're right here, ma'am. All right, yeah, you enjoy that, And the other question, going back to our discussion earlier on the Rodney King riots of 1992, comes from Stu Kelsall, who was watching from across the pond in England, where he wants to know, what do you feel are the biggest lessons the department learned after those particular events of Watts and Rodney King?
Wow, Stu, great question. That those lessons were countless. But I would say that the biggest one was that, and I could think of two or three, but the biggest one was that it would have been smarter and wiser to show much more force early and to be visible and aggressive early. I've told people this many times, and I truly believe it, Stu, that if Florence and Normandy is cleared, I mean, if officers go in there with force and they clear that intersection and it's live on TV around the world and Reginald Denny doesn't get beaten, maybe the riots don't happen to the extent they did. And the reason I say that is because the average person that went out there to loot, for instance, they're not criminals normally. They were at home and saying, wow, police aren't doing anything. Look at Florence and Normandy. A police car went through that intersection at one point and sped off. And people were at home watching that and said, well, I need new sneakers. I need a new TV. I really believe that the biggest lesson was that we needed to respond more visually and more aggressively early. And maybe we would have narrowed that writing down. You're not getting rid of the anger from the community. That was going to happen anyway and linger. But the violence and the fires and the businesses burned and the people injured like Denny and others, we could have nullified a lot of that had we done what we were trained to do and training to do. Had we done that early on, I think that was a big lesson that I know a lot of people took away. Certainly the street officers did, but command knew it too. In hindsight, they knew it too. And they were caving in a little bit to the politics of it. And keep in mind, this is Daryl Gates too. This is not a weak chief. This is a chief that had guts and said things openly and got him in trouble regularly. But a great guy, a great man, a great chief. He's the chief. I mean, to this day, that's what we call him, the chief. We had many other chiefs, but he's the chief. But even he looked back and said, wow, we didn't do enough, and we didn't do it fast enough and aggressively enough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you live and you learn. I mean, and to your point, on a more comedic note, you remember that Oral Hershiser jersey that was previously cost $90, son? It's free tonight. But that's what it was. That's what was happening back then.
Absolutely true, Mike. It was.
Gates was vocal about it on his radio show. After he retired, he had a radio show for a while where he was very vocal about that.
Yeah.
Amongst other things, he was vocal about. He was not shy to speak his mind. So I'm glad.
No. He was never shy to speak his mind. I loved him, and I just I loved him as a chief, and he would remember you. I mean, this was almost 10,000 officers. He would remember you and come up and talk to you. And I would often kid about it and say, if you were around Daryl Gates for 10 minutes, he'd know how many goals your kid had at hockey last weekend by the end of the conversation. He cared about cops. He cared about your families. What's going on wherever you worked? What's going on at air support? What's going on in Canine? What can we do to make it better? That was Daryl Gates. And, that's why we loved him.
No, of course.
Still do.
There's another chief I want to get to a little bit later on that had a big impact in New York and had a big impact in LA, and I'll ask you about him momentarily.
Sure.
You probably know who I'm talking about.
I do.
1997. This is what we were talking about off the air, and I have one of the people that was there in a canine role at this time, in that this is something where two guys were literally inspired by Hollywood. It's February of 1997. They had watched the movie Heat, which come out in 95. Great movie, by the way. Pacino, De Niro, one of my favorite flicks, directed by Michael Mann. And that shootout scene, which many people regard as an iconic scene and one of the best in cinema history, is what inspired these two nut jobs that took it to the entirely different extreme. You mentioned bank robberies earlier. They did a bank robbery, and in the process of that, armed to the teeth, quite literally, kicked off one of the most famous shootouts, not just in L.A.P.D. history, but law enforcement history, period. And you were there that day. So February of 1997, your perspective on the North Hollywood shootout, you have the floor.
Sure. That was a very unusual day. I was at home, and I remember just flipping through the channels, and I see it. It's live on Channel 9. It's live on 2, 4, 7, 9, 5, 11. It's live. And I'm looking at it, and I'm like, filming a movie. That's, honest to God, that's what I thought. They're showing some footage of filming a movie, because they would have that on the news and say, today in downtown LA, they're filming Heat, or something. And you'd see that. It wasn't unusual. And I kept watching. I'm going, wow, this looks really real. And then they pan back, and I'm seeing LAPD cars, and I'm seeing officers laying next to the cars, and this guy. And then I realized this is real. And it was bizarre to a cop even. It was just like, this can't be real. I call into Metro. I was working Canine. I call into Metro, and they answer, Metropolitan Division. I said, hey, Schonely from Canine. And they didn't let me finish my sentence. Get to the CP on Victory. And they hang up on me. And I went, whoa. So that means the whole world's coming now. So I raced into the command post. By the time I got there, the shooting has stopped, and there is a huge perimeter containment. It's like 24 to 26 blocks that's contained around the B of A area. There was enough information that they believed there might be a third guy. And you can imagine how many witnesses and information that they're dealing with. But there was a lot of information that was leading toward a third guy. So they said, well, we're going to search this. And it's the largest canine search in LAPD history. The sheriffs helped us with the far end of the block. I mean, and we all just lined up on Victory and went northbound. It was a huge search with SWAT with you. It took hours. On a funny note, I can tell you the thing that I complain about North Hollywood is we started that search and it was kind of a nice day, and you were sweating, and we finished it in the dark and it cooled off and we were chilled. I mean, all that sweat is now frozen, cold, cold by LA standards, not cold by New Haven, Connecticut standards, Mike, just so we're clear. And the thing that pissed us all off was that we got done and get back to the command post, and In-N-Out Burger, you've heard of In-N-Out Burger. It's a huge burger chain, of course. They have a trailer that goes to events. The In-N-Out Burger trailer was there. They were serving burgers all day. When we got back, done with this search, all the SWAT and K-9 people, they were all out of burgers. So all the command post people, they were eating their In-N-Out all day. The workers, the people that were out there, it was grueling. My dog was exhausted. I was exhausted. My SWAT guys were exhausted. We're just looking for a burger. And they go, "Oh, sorry, we're out of burgers." we were very mad. That's the other thing I remember about North Hollywood. But what an event. I mean, just incredible event, and some incredible heroism by Metro SWAT guys, all the SWAT guys that arrived at that scene. I mean, Rick Massa, Donnie Anderson, Steve Gomez. They're the guys that are behind the car going face to face with that one guy and crawling out of the car and then knocking the guy down there at the very end of it all. Those three heroes, courageous, unbelievable what they did. And, the events that day are just very unique. As you pointed out, they were inspired by Heat and Val Kilmer and De Niro, but it happened. It happened. Lots of rounds fired. We were very fortunate not to come out of there with any dead police officers. Very, very fortunate. We were outgunned by far, and they actually hit a news helicopter that day. They were shooting at the police helicopter that was overhead. They were shooting at newscapters. Everything that moved was getting shot at. It was amazing. One last thing about that's an interesting fact is that the one suspect that the SWAT guys dealt with, he died of blunt trauma. He had Kevlar taped like hockey. I noticed you're a Rangers fan. He had like hockey gear underneath those clothing with Kevlar, and he was getting hit a lot. It just wasn't penetrating the Kevlar, and he died of blunt trauma. I mean, that's how many times he was hit. Just amazing. Just a bizarre day, and lessons learned. Not long after that, L.A.P.D. patrol officers got rifles. Before that, L.A.P.D. patrol officers did not have rifles, shotguns only. That day changed a lot of things tactically and equipment-wise for Los Angeles Police Department.
Mm-hmm. And it's ending, and thank you for sharing that perspective on that day. Even though you'd rather it didn't happen in the first place, the ending was good in the sense that no police officers were killed. The only two people that died that day were the bad guys.
Correct. One with a self-inflicted gunshot wound, and the other one at the hands of Donnie, Rick, and Steve.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you. They were great. Those three guys, they were great that day. They made us all very, very proud to be part of Metro.
1997 is a significant year for you in that not only is there this, but that's the year you also go to air support. So you had a lot of experience on the ground. You've been the type of guy in our conversation tonight that it's very obvious leaps of faith don't scare you. Other people are hesitant. They never do it. You jump right in with both feet, and that's a good thing. Yeah. This is amazing because you talk about prestige. The L.A.P.D. itself has prestige, but the air support division is so iconic. Like we talked about earlier with pursuits, the news copters up there, sure. The L.A.P.D. copters up there too. And supporting cops from above, having that bird's eye view is so essential. And you saw that, of course, with K-9. You're seeing things they don't see quite yet. You're observing things where suspects are, where they're hiding, if they have weapons on them, if they have even hostages on them. And you can relay that to officers on the street running, not knowing what they're running towards. You mentioned it earlier, adrenaline's pumping. You don't know what's waiting for you around the corner. Air support does. What was it that attracted you to air support? Did you have any prior flying experience?
Well,
Hmm.
no prior flying experience. I did a couple ride-alongs at air support over the years, just where I was extra one night. I said, "Hey, can I go up to air support for a ride-along just to see what they do?" They encouraged that, and I loved it. It was really fun. But while I was in canine, I was getting toward the end there of my 5 years, and my dog still had some time left that I could work him. But a friend of mine at Air Support, a great TFO, Pat McNamara, called me up and said, "Hey, Jack, you should apply for tactical flight officer," which is the old observer, JAFO observer, but it's called tactical flight officer. And I said, "Oh, I don't know." And he goes, "No, no, no. You'd be good at this. You can talk, and you know the city, and you know tactics. That's what it is, man. You ought to think about it." And he convinced me. I applied, and next thing you know, boom, I'm in on my loan, and I'm in training, and I make it. And at that time, there was about a 90% washout rate for people trying to become a tactical flight officer. I have told this to people many times. TFOs, that's the hardest job in law enforcement when done correctly. It's the hardest job in law enforcement by far. And but some people just kind of fall into it. And I can tell you that my canine time really helped me. And there are other canine handlers I know that have become TFOs all across the United States. And they all say, "Oh my God, thank God I worked canine. It helped me be a better TFO." Absolutely true. Absolutely true. So, I went there as a tactical flight officer, and what a ride that was. I mean, just you're in on everything. We fly 20 hours a day. At that time, there were 3 helicopters flying on patrol 20 hours a day, 17,000 hours a year as a unit. Nobody does that. Nobody comes close to flying 17,000 hours a year, law enforcement wise, in the world. And we did it. And you were over everything that happens that's important. You were over it, and it was wonderful. Just you had a lot of impact on the outcomes. You had a lot of impact on tactics, on officer safety, and it was very, very rewarding. I love that TFO job. It was great.
No, it sounds like it. In 19 years, you loved it that much. You stayed there almost 2 decades. It kind of encapsulated, I should say, the brunt of your career. And what's good about this is before you can go to any of these special, operations command units in any department, on the fire side or the police department side, you got to learn the street first, learn to
Oh
be a
yeah,
fireman first, learn to be a cop first. And you did. You had 14 years of experience, 13, 14 years of
yeah,
experience before you made this leap. So coming
right.
into it as a veteran officer, even though you're a rookie all over again,
Yep.
having had that background, especially in K9, where you understand supporting patrol to begin with from a different aspect, but supporting patrol nevertheless with an important backup aspect, it makes that job easier. So as
Much.
far as flying went, that's the daunting part. I don't know how often you flew, if at all. I imagine you did a number of times. But as far as getting trained to be a pilot, what was that like?
Well, so that it's 2 different positions: tactical flight officer,
Hmm.
command pilot. So you could be a TFO and be a TFO for the rest of your career. Some people chose to try to become a pilot. I became the chief TFO for a short time, and then I decided I'm going to try to become a pilot. And I went out and got my fixed wing license and 100 hours of pilot and command time, and did all the requirements, and then applied and got the job. And they trained me to fly helicopters. LA is a unique place. They train in-house, and you learn to fly a helicopter. So from 2000 to 2016, I was flying. I still work as a TFO occasionally, but not very often. And it's a perishable skill. I felt really good when I was TFO, and I felt pretty confident I could handle anything. And then you go away from it for a while, you get thrown back in that left seat again. You go, "Oh my gosh, this job really is hard," because it is. But piloting, completely different. You're responsible for, the safety of that aircraft, fly within the rules, very busy airspace, LAX, Burbank, Van Nuys, Santa Monica, all these airports that you're dealing with. And at the same time, you're putting that aircraft in a position where the TFO can do their job, whether it's a surveillance or over a pursuit or a foot pursuit, or just going to a burglary call in progress. No matter what it is, putting that TFO in a good position and doing it safely. That was the pilot job. And I did that for the rest of my time there. In addition to a bunch of other stuff, I became an instructor and I ended up teaching and doing check rides and all sorts of other stuff. But the flying out in patrol, that was a blast. Just going out there, flew about 5 to 6 hours a day. The hours built up really fast, and we had a huge impact on the outcomes of events, no doubt about it.
And it's also not even the events where it's a patrol response, such as a pursuit, or you're looking for a suspect. There's a manhunt going on. It's also surveillance for parades, and you had quite a bit of that in the early 2000s. The Lakers had their three-peat with Kobe and Shaq. You're trying to make sure there's no drunks doing anything they shouldn't be in the crowd or anything like that. So even stuff like that you're keeping an eye on, there's that component of it too. So it's a very rewarding job, and I think you got to train some candidates or evaluate some candidates at the very minimum, to see who was going to come in and make a good fit, and maybe who should probably learn to be a cop, like we were talking about earlier, before they could come in. So
absolutely,
for you, what was there's the department standards, but there's also your personal barometer. What was your personal barometer for deciding, yep, I want this guy or girl in this unit?
It was, can they handle the pressure, and can they keep cool under that pressure, and can they navigate and communicate? Those are the big ones: the pressure, navigation, communication. When I first went there, navigation was out of a Thomas Guide map book. I mean, some people don't even know what Thomas Guides are in today's world. But they were like, that was our Bible. You made your own Thomas Guide, you laminated it, and that's what you navigated out of. And eventually, it became GPS and computerized, where you punch it into on a keyboard and it tells you exactly where the house is. It was much easier. But in the day, could you navigate? Most people struggled at navigation. That was the number one washout, that they couldn't navigate. They couldn't find, some people couldn't find their own houses. I mean, and I can tell you that a common denominator that I found was, including myself, is that people that were really good at navigating, they liked maps as a kid. I don't know what it was, but I loved maps and globes, and I was into that. I love looking at maps, and a lot of TFOs will tell you, yeah, I did too, and so there's things that are in you that would translate into that TFO job, and understanding maps, being able to look something up, find it, and now look out the window and go that way, partner, and then find it on the ground. That's a whole next leap of accomplishment in handling that call. Some people just could not do that, and they wouldn't make it. There you go.
Yep, that's the old Thomas Guide. Thank you for pulling that up, producer Vick. And to me, I mean, that's almost like reading Chinese. So I don't know how you guys did that.
So you would take that page that just put up, and then you would color it, and you would put boundaries of the division. You would highlight fire stations, highlight antenna towers, highlight all sorts of things in different colors so that they would jump out at you. And then you would highlight with a highlighter 100 blocks so that it would be easier to read than that. But that's how you started. You started with a page just like that. And then you had to be able to look at that and say, well, we're going to 1322 West, 48th Street. Okay. Hey, partner, head towards Normandy, because I know 1300 block is Normandy. Head toward Normandy and 48th, and then you would fine tune it by looking in the map. It was very challenging, but it was fun. And once you got good at it, and a lot of people do, I mean, yes, we had a high washout rate, but the people that did pass, man, they could do it. And it was fun and challenging and rewarding and all that stuff that we've been talking about, all those things that come with law enforcement and public service. It's rewarding when in the end, there's somebody getting put in that car in handcuffs that wouldn't be there if it weren't for you being overhead. That happened all the time.
Right. No, and it's almost, I liken it to being, the composer of a symphony, right? Or somebody who is moving the symphony along as a conductor or a composer, if you will, to where you're guiding the instruments. Okay, the violinist, you pick it up here. The celloist, you pick it up here. Same thing with the pursuit, because you have that enhanced perspective, much like the conductor does, where he or she can see everything of what their orchestra is doing and performing. That's the perspective of an air support officer up in the air. You can see everything that's going on. You know, if there's a cadre of foot traffic up ahead, hey guys, slow down. There's a lot of people walking on block X, Y, and Z. You know, if it's empty and he's bailing out on a side street, he's down that alley. He went behind the dumpster. He might have a gun on him. I saw him reaching for his waistband.
Yeah.
And not only here's the added benefits. You save lives that way, both as civilians and officers, and even the bad guys we talked about earlier with K9 on some occasion. But cops of your era working off that map that we saw earlier, you learn to work without, because as tools get more modern, let's say you don't have time to pull up a guide or enter it into the GPS and get more information off the more modern technology, because you've been trained this way and you've had time to learn it, you could work without it. Because sometimes, and that's how it is in police work, you don't have all the tools at your disposal. How are you going to work under that pressure? How are you going to survive under that pressure? That's where you find out who's the real police.
Oh yeah, great analogy with the conductor. Great analogy. And I'll just add this: that even after we got the high tech stuff, we still required that our candidates to learn the map book, because technology is great until it locks up. And in the middle of a help call with shots fired, an officer down, and now you could reach back, grab that map book, and go, I don't need this moving map. I can do it the old-fashioned way. And that was very important for our TFOs to learn that old-fashioned way, because of technology locking up occasionally. And it was always at the Murphy's Law. It was always at the worst possible time to lock up.
Yeah, and what's the old saying? Irish guys always tell me this: Murphy's Law, Murphy's an Irishman. So it's a double whammy. Yeah. Shout out to my friends Javian and Kevin tuning into the chat, being their usual crazy selves. Thanks, guys, for watching. Now, you were a military liaison officer as well, and that is composed of a lot, because there's situations where you have to support various U.S. military helicopter units and aspects of support. So scenarios, without getting into anything that's classified for national security reasons, how exactly on the surface level were you supporting them, and what were the scenarios where their presence in the air would be required?
Sure, nothing classified to talk about. It was very simple. There were certain aviation units, particularly Special Operations Aviation Regiment, SOAR, Task Force 160, that would come to Los Angeles a couple times a year and to do urban training. And sometimes they would have customers in the back, sometimes SEAL team, sometimes Delta, sometimes Rangers, and they would come into town and need to do fast roping onto a rooftop for urban training. And there was a SWAT officer, Steve Scallon, who was amazing at coordinating the ground part of it. He came to me one day and said, hey, I really need your help, man. I got aviation assets coming in. They're asking about landing zones and fuel and airports and offsite stuff. Hey, I can help with that. And the division said, yeah, help them in any way you can. And we had it right from the mayor and the chief on down. We had full support, and I supported the aviation side. And whatever they needed, we would do whatever we could to support them while they were training. And I learned so much. I can't even tell you about safety and about briefings and about debriefings and about just operations in general from those people. And some of them are dear friends now. I mean, that military liaison job was a great, great gig. And I miss that. But I still have contact with those guys and still get to talk to them. And I'm co-hosting on the Hangar Z podcast now. We've had a couple of them on. We're going to have another one on here soon to talk about especially safety. The military, that particular unit, really takes safety to a whole new level. And they taught us things that we weren't doing, and it helped us be better. But that's what it was about. Canadian units came in. It wasn't just U.S. And it was fun. It was educational, and they sure appreciated it, because without practicing, they're going to go to these urban areas someplace on the planet, and they got to be able to navigate in an urban area and drop off customers effectively and efficiently and safely and all that stuff. And if they don't practice, there's going to be tragedies. So that's what we did. We just supported them in any way we could.
And it's that networking that goes a long way, because you never know when you're going to need to lean into that. And that's vice versa for them, and certainly for you guys. I wanted to make mention of this too, and I alluded to it earlier. 2002 comes around. And America, especially big cities, are in a different place to where big cities, what are they worried about? Terrorism,
Yeah.
especially after what had happened the year before with the Trade Center attack in New York and the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. Now, a guy with a funny Boston accent becomes your chief in 2002. And we have some background noise, by the way, on your end. We have Bill Bratton, of course, who was the chief of the New York City Transit Police, Boston Police Commissioner, New York City Police Commissioner. He had been out of the game for a while. After he left the NYPD in '96, he went into the private sector. He had done some consulting work in California. He was doing some consulting work with the LAPD. And he comes in 2002 after not too long after Ramparts and another difficult chapter for the LAPD. And man, by the time he left, did he cement himself as one of the greatest chiefs the department ever had. What was it like working for Boston Bill?
Well, I had regular contact with him when I was working at air support. Flew in places, and he would come up for events. So I got to be around him a little bit, and as well as John Miller.
Yep.
I'm told that I'm John Miller's stunt double. I don't know if you noticed that or not. I know
You bear
interviewed
resemblance.
John.
You do bear resemblance.
We actually had a picture taken one time because people would joke about that and say, "Hey, you guys look alike." It depends on what glasses we're wearing.
Yes.
But working for Chief Bratton was good. He came in with a big job to do. Right? And you described the time very nicely, Mike. It was a very challenging time to come from outside and come into the LAPD. And he did. And he came in with confidence, and he put the right people in the right places. Jim McDonald being one of those that comes to mind, and made things happen. And a lot of good things happened. And he held people accountable, captains and above accountable for their divisions and their people. That was a big difference that trickled down to where we would notice it. At the level that I'm at. I'm not in the command level. I'm down at the bottom. But he took that challenge on head on, and he didn't look back. And I know I watched your interview with him, and it was a really good interview too, Mike. You did a great job, and it was fun watching you remind him of things that he had done. And I told my wife tonight, I said, "Hey, this Mike Colón's a sharp guy. He's going to tell me something I did that I don't remember because I've seen him do that with John Miller. I saw him do it with Bill Bratton." But he took it on head on and did a good job.
He did, and that was the longest gig he had. Even though he made profound impacts in New York with transit, only in transit for 2 years, only in the NYPD for 2 years, LA, he had more time. And that was where he got the fullest version of him. He had a full 7 years to do exactly what he wanted to do with nobody impeding him. And like I said, by the time he left, I think an activist told him, "What we love about you, Chief, is you see us." And you know what? That applied to the community and the cops. You saw him. He led from the front. He made the impact. He made the difference. And man, the LAPD for quite a while there was in great shape well after his departure. He really left it much better than he found it.
Yeah, he did. And as a matter of fact, I just came across a picture with him the other day where my dad met him. And he was, I remember that day. It was at air support, and my dad was thrilled. He just thought this was so cool that he's meeting Chief Bill Bratton, and he was just so nice to my dad, and talked to him for a while. And that, my dad's still alive and kicking, and he remembers that too. And that makes me feel good. Not all chiefs of police are like that. Let's just put it that way.
Well, we know. Very personable man, and John Miller did some great work out there too. He wasn't there as long, unfortunately. He was only there from 03 to 05. I wish he would have stuck around longer too. But he's doing okay for himself. He's got that big cushy job at CNN. He got that big cushy job back at the NYPD. So John, you're doing quite fine.
Yep. And he has a stunt double whenever he needs it.
Yep.
So there you go.
Course, you can't make the live hit on CNN. You got Jack there waiting.
That's right. If he can't make it, I'll go in. I'm not as good looking as him, but that's all right. I can fake it for a few minutes on CNN.
So that brings us to 2016, and this has been such a blur, but there's always that point, and the old timers say it when you're getting on, like we talked about earlier. You ask an old timer, when do you know when it's time to retire? They'll just tell you, you'll know. There'll be something that tells you mentally, yeah, it's time. And man, 33 years, even though you're still teaching, you're still
Oh
active
yeah,
with the podcast, which we'll talk
yeah.
about momentarily. 33 years, it flies by in the blink of an eye. So many different cool assignments. Nevertheless, you reach the point where you say, okay, I think I've reached the end of the road here. When was that moment, or was it a series of moments for you that made you say, you know what? Probably time to put my papers in.
It was a series of moments. It wasn't just one thing or one particular. It wasn't like a light bulb went on. And I went, "Yep, time to retire." It
Yep.
was a series of things, and it just seemed right. And then in hindsight, it was genius. It makes me look like a genius. My timing was
Masterstroke.
perfect, you know. But I'm not a genius, and everyone will tell you that. So it was fortunate that I left when I did. I left on a high note. I left. I felt like I left a place that I had some impact on and did some good things and left it in a better place in some ways. And there were people uh, that had, since I've left, have made it places that I worked great, much better. But I felt really good about the timing, and it was just a variety of things. And I wanted to leave so that I still had time to do some stuff, and be healthy and, young enough. And I could have stayed longer. I had the best job on the planet. I was a pilot at L.A.P.D air support. That doesn't get any better than that. You're in on everything. You're not getting spit on. You're not getting cut and hurt, uh, but you're in on everything. And I had a great job around great people. But there's life beyond police work. There's life after LAPD. And although it was difficult to hand in, your stuff there in that last day, at the same time, it was like a relief. It was like, oh, we would talk about it all the time, say that people that retire, you see them a year or so later and they look younger. And it's like, how's that happen? Well, it's because all that, the burden of the job, that even though you were having fun and it was a good job, it's still a job that had a lot of responsibility. And um, retirement is good. It's really good.
I'm glad, because you know what? As I've covered a million times, when guys tell me I missed the job, you made it to the finish line.
Yeah.
Look again. I go back to the Officer Down Memorial page.
Yes.
Look at the names of guys and girls that did not make it to the end.
Yep.
And you think about them all the time, and you don't forget them. When you can get to the finish line and hand in your papers, hey, you
Yeah.
know what? It's okay to miss it.
Yeah.
You're here. You're here, and you made it. And that's
There's-
more than, unfortunately, some good people can say.
There's over 23,000 names on that wall in DC. 41 killed in the line of duty during my time on my department. That's a lot of funerals. So yes, I do feel for it. I really do. I dodged some bullets. I mean, there was. I look back and go, "Wow, glad I made it out of that." And we all did. We all did. And so yes, that there's something to be said for that. Where you just say, "Wow, I feel fortunate because many didn't." Some cops that were much better cops than I ever was are not here today. And you know why did I make it, and why did this person make it and that person didn't? It can bother you at times, no doubt about it.
And we, like I said, we don't forget them, and we thank them for
No,
all they did and sacrificing their lives for the greater good.
absolutely, Mike.
One more thing I wanted to touch on before we get to the rapid fire, and this has been just a fabulous conversation. Actually, two
Thanks.
things. One, the teaching aspect. You love
Yeah.
when people, because there are some people, and I understand both sides of the coin. When some people retire, they say, you know what, I'm going to leave all that stuff behind. I'm going to ride off into the sunset. And hey, after a 20, 25, 30-year career, they earn that right to say that.
Yep.
I got no problem with them saying that. But I also love the flip side of the coin, where someone says, I have all this knowledge. This doesn't leave me. It stays stuck in your brain forever until the day you die. I'm going to share this with people, especially these young guys and gals that are coming on. They're enthusiastic. I was that guy once. I was that enthusiastic young kid. So I'm going to pass this on. And you've done that. So tell me about getting into teaching. And much like, of course, I asked you in regards to police work, what's been some of the more rewarding moments with being an instructor? And what are you teaching on for those that don't know?
Wow, good stuff there, Mike. I created a class called Apprehending Fleeing Suspects back 24 years ago. It started as a 2-hour class at an aircrew course here in California, and it turned into a 4-hour, and then a 6-hour, then an 8-hour. And next thing you know, that class took me all over the United States teaching it. And because it was popular, it was about foot pursuits and perimeter containment, search techniques. And I started doing it as my side thing. And I just kept doing it. And it continues to be popular because it's unique. It's unique. That class has taken me around the world. I've been to Australia, all across Canada, been all across Europe, and in every corner of the United States, departments big and small. And in '07, I wrote a book, Apprehending Fleeing Suspects. It's basically the class in a book at the encouragement of friends. The same friend that told me to start doing the class told me to write the book. Rick Lowen pushed me a lot, and I thank him every time I see him for doing that, because I've got to see and meet people that I would have never seen and met before. And to get to your question about, what jumps out at you, it's the friendships that I've made in going places and meeting cops in Alabama and Florida and Sydney, Australia, and Netherlands. I mean, I have very close friends all over the world now because of that class. But if there's one thing that I had to pick about doing that class, it's very rewarding. I had an officer on my own department on LA. I don't even know his name. He came up to me at a class one time at one of the breaks and said, "Hey, I took this class about 2 years ago, and I wanted to tell you that about 8 months ago, your class saved my life." And I went, "Yeah, that's okay." And he goes, "No, I'm serious." And there's a point in the class where I talk about going around corners and how you have to slow down, go wide, slice the pie when you're in foot pursuit. When the suspect disappears around a corner, you don't go barrel around that corner, because the way officers get killed in foot pursuits is bad guys go around corners, they stop, turn, and they're waiting for you. And you come barreling around the corner, they ambush you and kill you. That happens almost every year. So I talk about that. This young officer said, "I was going around a corner about 8 months ago, and I heard your voice in my head. And it said, 'Slow down, go wide, slice the pie.' And I did. I listened to your voice in my head. And sure enough, the suspect's there waiting for me. He's no longer with us. I'm here. Thank you, Jack." I almost fell over. I mean, I literally had to grab the table. I was shaking. I was shaking. It was the most amazing thing to get that. And I'm not telling you the story to brag. I'm telling you the story because that's why trainers do this. And that's why I do it. There's times when I go, I'm getting too old for this. I'm just an old gray-haired guy. These young kids don't need to hear me anymore. And then I get feedback from someone with a story. And I go, I got to keep doing this. I got to keep doing this. I mean, so I'm gonna do it until they stop asking me to do it. That's how I look at it as far as the class. And every year I go places and teach that class, and I love doing it. It's not work. The travel sucks. I hate, I'd rather be skiing or ride my mountain bike or sitting at home. But outside the travel, it's very rewarding because of feedback and the friendships. Those are the two things.
Very nice. Very nice. You also have the podcast too, hence the wonderful setup that you have. This is
Yeah.
this is much better than mine. Especially the
Oh.
wall behind you. You have the man cave. This is great. I'm trying to I have to beef up this wall behind me and enhance it a little bit more. But tell me about getting into that, because again, sticking out in the podcast space, and I know this firsthand is not easy, but obviously your experience and your perspective allows you that luxury to stick out. Tell me about what your show touches on, and go ahead, promote it.
Well, I'll tell you, thank you for letting me promote it. It's called the Hangar Z Podcast. The Hangar Z Podcast. It was started by John Gray. He's a retired Ontario PD, Southern California, Ontario PD pilot. And he started it and then brought a guy named Jeff Radovich on. And the two of them were doing it for a while. And one day they called me and said, "Hey, could you be a guest?" Just like I'm doing with Mike Colón. And we did it, and it went great. They had me back on for something, back on again. And next thing you know, last September, October, John calls me and says, "Hey, listen, would you like to join that?" And I said, "Yes." He didn't even finish his sentence. And I said, "Yes." He goes, "Hold it. You don't know." I said, I know I want to do this. And I came in at episode 100. And these guys said, Mike, this is hard work. And producer Vick knows too. It's not easy, and especially to start out, you learn so much. I didn't have to do any of that. I'm coming in at the tail end. I'm just talking and helping bring guests in. I'm doing the easy part. As you can tell, I kind of like to talk, so it's easy. And they appreciate it. John and Jeff appreciate it very much, and they got scooped up by Vertical Helicasts, which is part of Vertical Magazine, which is a huge helicopter magazine, and other magazines. And it's part of a Vertical Helicast has several podcasts, but Hangar Z is one of them, and I'm loving it. It's so much fun, and we've had some great guests. Episode 100 and 101 were a guy named Jimmy Hatch, a U.S. Navy SEAL, who was right down the street from you. He goes to Yale.
Okay.
He's a senior at Yale, but he's a SEAL that got severely injured, and long story, canine handler. And I knew him before he was injured through a friend, Canine World,
Right. Networking.
Yeah. And we called him up. He wrote a book called Touching the Dragon, fabulous book. And I called him up and said, would you be willing to do this podcast? I just hooked up with these guys. He goes, heck yeah. It was fantastic. It was basically about PTS. So we don't just touch on law enforcement aviation. We talk about PTS, the tough topics. That was a really powerful, emotional 2-part series. I mean, but it needed to be talked about. And it does. We talked to a lot of other people. We talked to helicopter pilots that actually inserted him into that incident, who I met through the military liaison part of it. And it's been great. It's been great. I'm really enjoying it. And thanks for letting me talk about the Hangar Z podcast. It's
no problem. I'm going to check it out.
It's a lot of fun. Yeah, please do, Mike. I think you'd enjoy it. You don't have to be a law enforcement aviator to enjoy some of it. We have some very interesting people on. And it's rewarding in that way too. You know that you've been doing this a lot, 300 plus. I mean, that's a lot of podcasts, a lot of work. And you do your homework. You actually, Mike, I got to tell you, you actually have inspired me after we had contact and you asked me to come on, which was months ago. And I started watching and going, wow, that I'm going to be more like Mike Colón here because of the homework you do. And I try to do that. And so thank you, Mike, for inspiring me to be a better podcaster by being ready and prepared to and know what that guest has done. So thanks, Mike.
Oh, no, I am flattered. I don't even know. I'm honored and humbled that you would say that. I do put a lot of prep work into it, you always wonder if people notice that. So for you to notice that, and I know you guys in the audience notice it too.
Oh, it's really very noticeable, Mike. Very noticeable. And that makes a difference. It makes the guest feel like you really care, because you do. Your passion for law enforcement and first responders particularly is very appreciated by everybody that listens, because that's, in today's world, I don't have to tell you, it's tough being in this business of law enforcement and firefighting, and it's tough, and don't feel appreciated every now and then. But if you turn on your podcast, you feel appreciated. So thanks for that, Mike.
Oh, no problem. It's an honor and a pleasure talking to you guys. And we're definitely, as the beat expands as a miniseries, going to get more Los Angeles police officers on, both from Sheriff's Office and, of course, the L.A.P.D. And you were the first, and I thank you for that.
I'm been honored to be the first.
This has been a wonderful conversation, one of the best I can say I've ever had. And that brings us to this rapid fire now, which is 5 hit-run questions from me, 5 hit-run answers from you as we cap off this outstanding episode. You could say pass if you want. I'll jump into the first question. And if you want to say multiple here, that's fine. You don't have to pick one.
Okay.
Funniest call you ever responded to?
Oh, pursuit with a guy dressed like a clown. Completely, with the shoes and everything, the nose, the hat. Swear to God.
Was he driving a clown car?
He wasn't in a clown car. Only one guy got out of it. It was him with the shoes on. Never forget it. One of the funniest things I've ever seen.
Oh boy, it doesn't get much funnier than that. On that note, second most uplifting call you ever responded to?
Ooh, uplifting! Wow. That's really tough. Uplifting is a really interesting term. I would say uplifting in that you really felt appreciated. I would say a canine search where we found a guy hiding that had just purse snatched a young lady in Hollywood, and she was devastated. And 20 minutes later, we come down the steps out of an apartment building with her purse and the bad guy and hand it back to her. She was very appreciative. She was in tears thanking us. That was pretty cool.
That's awesome. Oh, of
Yeah.
course, the moments like that you don't forget. Third, and you've kind of touched on this, but you can expand on it here in this question. Third, best advice anyone ever gave you.
Wow. I would say, and I wish I could remember because I heard it from multiple people, but early on I had several people tell me, don't take this job personally. And what they meant was once you do your job and you hand off that body to the jail, you're done. You go
It's over.
testify and stuff, but it's over. Whatever the district attorney does and whatever a jury does and whatever a judge does, don't let that get to you. Do your job the best you can. Do it right. Do it to the best of your abilities, but don't beat yourself up if it doesn't go your way, after you've done your part. I thought that was really good advice. And the other one that comes to mind is don't watch the local news.
Yeah, that's true. That's another big one. That's another big one, of course, especially these days. Fourth, this is where you could really say multiple because it's impossible to pick one. After a long day on the beat, favorite bar or restaurant in Los Angeles?
Wow. I tell you where I went often, Jerry's Deli. We went there on duty most of the time. They liked the police for the most part. And it was very good. And a lot of celebrities there, including Jerry Seinfeld. We'd see Jerry there all the time at Jerry's Deli. It wasn't Jerry Seinfeld's deli, but we'd see Jerry there in the 0200. That was pretty popular. That was a good spot.
Sounds like it. And fifth and finally, and to anybody, not just in the L.A.P.D. that's coming out to the job now in law enforcement, like you touched on, not an eeasy time, but from your years of experience, 36 in total, counting your years in Berks County, what advice would you give a new cop coming on the job now?
Well, fortunately, I get to do that all the time because I still teach at the police academy here in Oregon. Right. About 6 days a month, I go over and teach firearms, building search. Those are the two main things. And so I get to give that advice regularly. That I tell them you've got to stay in shape, and you have to keep your skill set up constantly. Don't let your guard down. Continue to learn. Continue to go out, and learn new things. Read articles. Go to training. Go for runs. Do your push-ups and sit-ups. Do all that because someday that's could be the difference in you getting home or not. We want you to get home every single night. And so you got to think about those things constantly. Most recruits think about that when they're in the academy, but then they get out of the academy and go, oh, I'm done with that. Oh, no. It's just begun. The learning has just begun. So keeping those skills up and never, I still learn things. I learn things teaching building search every single time I do it. I learned something from a recruit where I watched them do something. I go, man, I never thought about it that way. That's kind of cool. So you can know a lot about something, but never stop learning and stay in good physical shape. Those are big ones.
That's an important thing. And I'm glad you mentioned that because one of my deputy chiefs, we just hired 8 new firefighters this past December in my department. And he said that to them. He says exact words were to them after the academy, you're in the best shape of your lives right now. It's up to you to maintain it.
Yep.
And I'm glad you mentioned that because it's true. No matter what you're doing, you're putting a patient on a stretcher, you're carrying that gun belt, and that equipment can be heavy. Stay in shape. It's important.
Not just for life or death stuff, just for well-being. Like you said,
day to day.
You don't want to end up getting retired because your back goes out or, or an injury from just wear and tear. Yeah, good advice.
Well said. Like I said, this has been a phenomenal episode. I can't thank you enough.
Thanks,
and
Mike.
Definitely, we will update the description. Vic, if you can put the link to the Hanger Z podcast in the description so our audience can go flock to it. I highly recommend you guys do. I know I will. We can do that. So before I say goodbye to the audience, any shout outs to anyone or anything, Jack, that you'd like to give?
Well, I'll just thank you again, Mike, for reaching out to me. I was pleasantly surprised. And once I looked you up, I went, oh my goodness, look what Mike Colón is doing. I mean, you wear a lot of hats, first of all. It's amazing all the things you do, but the things that you're doing for law enforcement and firefighting, particularly in your region. I mean, the NYPD and the FD, the things that you've done for them and to highlight their stories. I enjoy watching that. You know, I really do. And so shout out to you, Mike, and thanks for having me. I'm really honored. I hope you have some more LA folks on. There's a lot better cops out there than me, but they're, you know, and I'll help you with some of that if you want. But
oh, please do. Yeah, anybody
you
could think of.
Oh yeah, thank you very, very much. I really appreciate that, and thanks for the Hangar Z shout out. That John Gray has done an amazing job, and I'm just along for the ride, helping him any way I can. And it's like you know, it's fun. It's fun to do. It's fun having conversations. We're on two different coasts. I'd rather be there in New Haven and go down to Sally's and have some pizza. But are you a Sally's pizza guy?
I am. We can make that happen.
It's on my bucket list, Mike. It's on my bucket list. I'll be there someday. I promise you. We'll have a Sally's pizza together. I got to try that.
You got my number. You text me when you're coming down, and we're going to make that happen, my friend.
Sounds good.
Producer
Vick, you're coming along. So just so you know, Sally's Pizza is on the calendar in our futures.
Sounds good to me. Listen, you mentioned pizza. You had me there. nothing further to say there. I'm
there you go.
Said pizza, man. This has been fantastic. This has been. I can't thank you enough. And thanks to everybody that tuned in tonight via YouTube and LinkedIn as well. Those of you that will listen to this on audio, as always, appreciate it. John Costello, I saw your super chat earlier. Thank you to that. Or thank you for that, I should say. So this was fantastic. So our schedule coming up next on the Mike the New Haven podcast. Our schedule is going to be a little bit different, guys, for this upcoming week. So there's no show Wednesday. There'll be a show next Thursday. I'm going to return to my sports roots. I was originally a sports guy before I delved into law enforcement. High-profile baseball writer, covered the Yankees in the late 90s for the New York Times during their dynastic run. Covered the Mets, too, for a year in 1997. It's Buster Olney, who, if you watch ESPN a lot, you know him. So that'll be cool. And another volume of The Beat is coming up, volume 11. It's going to be Chief Richard Carey of the Paramus, New Jersey Police Department, who'll be giving me his perspective on what it was like to police in a city like that, where it's very transient. You have a lot of people coming in and out during the day because the freeway's right there. So it's not an easy beat. It's a unique one. And he'll tell me about his career leading up, of course, to leading the entire department itself. So 2 interesting shows on tap. And this was an interesting show. And on behalf of retired Los Angeles Police Department officer Jack Schonely and producer Victor, and all of you in the audience tonight, I'm Mike Colón. We'll see you next time and have a great weekend, everybody. Take care. Stay safe.